Welcome everyone, and today we're gonna have another episode of LFM TV. We have a special guest, and she also have her own practice, Chey Blake Law. Thank you so much for being here with us today,
Thank you for
Ms.
inviting
Blake.
me. My pleasure. My pleasure.
So let's say that I have a feature film. Let's say that I'm thinking to write it, or let's say that I have, like a friend of mine the other day came to me and say, "Hey, I'm looking for a writer because I want to do a screenplay." So, what are those first steps that the creative person should know before hiring somebody, or also to do copyright or
Well, when
know?
you're thinking about putting together a project, you probably want to first think about setting up a legal entity to protect your assets, your personal assets from potential liability, and also to separate out the funding for the project from your personal funding. And so having a legal entity would be very helpful. Most people set up an LLC. It's the easiest and most common. Sometimes people set up a corporation, but a corporation has certain tax disadvantages, and also it can be more administratively challenging because it has a lot of administrative requirements. You don't want to set up a sole proprietorship partnership because you really don't get the legal protection from that type of entity. So you first want to think about having an entity that will hold the property and hold it separate from your personal assets. And then you want to really look at, making sure that you and your co-creators, your collaborators, co-production partners are on the same page. So you want to have the conversations about what everyone's ownership interests are going to be in the property, what kind of credits everyone is going to get, and how much money people are going to get paid, what their revenue shares are, and most importantly, you want to make sure you're clear on who has the decision-making abilities. Who's going to be able to make the decisions about where the project gets distributed and those kinds of things, because you don't want to have an opportunity to distribute and then realize that you're in a big disagreement over who gets to or how the decisions are being made about that distribution. So you want to start with there. And once you have those conversations, put them in writing. It's really the most important first step. Is I always say, if you've got a co-writing team, if you are collaborating with someone, a production partner, you want to have a collaboration agreement in place in writing that sets all of that out so that everybody's clear on what their roles are, what they're getting out of it, and everyone's expectations are managed. So that's kind of where you want to start.
Yeah, it's very important also, to have agreements, how you mentioned contracts and the NDAs, to make sure that nobody's taking that idea away to another place.
Yeah, all of your agreements should definitely have non-disclosure language in them. And certainly you should, in addition to your co-creators, if you have any creative contributors, people that are doing graphic design or adding graphics or anything like that, editors, people that are script writers, these are your contributors to the project, and you want to have agreements in place with anyone who's contributing creative elements to the project. Those should be work for hire agreements, and if not, be really clear about what their interest is going to be. And you want to make sure you pay them. So they should have some kind of consideration, and it can be $1, but it should say what it is in the agreement, and you want to pay them. So once you start thinking about having other people involved, you want to be really sure that you've got agreements that give you the rights to what it is they're creating for you.
Yeah. So let's say, so what would be the steps if I wrote a screenplay and I want to secure it? What will be the process for it?
Well, it's a good thing you've got it written, because the first thing I always tell people is that if you've got an idea, ideas are not protectable. And so you want to write down your idea in as much detail as possible, because that is when you actually establish copyright rights in what you've created. Once it's written down, put into a tangible form, and you really want to make sure that it's not just generic. You want to make sure that it's original. Once you've got it written down, you want to register it for copyright protection. And this is before you go sharing it with all your friends and everyone who might, as you say, steal it. So you want to register it for copyright. It costs probably about $35. It's not very difficult to do. Some people think that just having it registered with the WGA is sufficient, but it really isn't the same. When you register with the Copyright Office, it gives you certain rights. You can get legal fees and significant damages if there is an infringement. So you want to make sure you take that step before you share it with lots of people, and include a copyright notice on your treatments and scripts and whatever it is. So even if it's just a treatment outline, make it detailed and make sure you register it and put a notice on it that says that this is your copyrighted property.
Yeah, that's very important. Let's say that, so we finished with that process, but now we're going into production. So what will be the legal aspect that a filmmaker and producer should be paying attention to?
Well, you want to, in production, make sure that you are creating a good chain of title. And by chain of title, that's really a documentation of all of the rights that you have acquired from any third parties or anyone who's providing creative services for you. That documentation is going to be important, not just in terms of obtaining E&O insurance, which any insurer is going to be looking for a good chain of title, but also down the line in case there are any claims from anyone that you're using something from them and you didn't have the rights. So having good chain of title is really important. So if you are doing a story, a documentation about someone's life, make sure that you've got the life story rights. That will not just protect you from a claim from them later that you're using their likeness without their permission, but also it gets you their cooperation. It gets you ideally their help in helping to promote it down the line, and also helping to get access to their life story information. If your property is based on a book or an article or some kind of other pre-existing work, you want to acquire all of the underlying rights that you need that really kind of support and make up the basis of your project. Yeah. In addition, you also then want to make sure that you're getting all the necessary clearances, and you're getting them, again, in writing so that you have good chain of title. Any permissions, any agreements with editors, any agreements, use of name and likeness. You want to make sure that you're getting all of those in writing all the time, and you're not kind of like skimping and thinking, I can have this artwork in the background without an issue. You want to look and really be careful about everything that's in the background, trademarks, whether they're being used prominently or in passing, because it can kind of be a fine line. Just a note on when you're asking for permission, if you ask for permission to use something and you don't get it, you want to make sure you don't just go ahead and use it anyway, because the fact that you've asked for permission now makes it clear that you knew you needed permission. So if you go ahead and use it without the permission, you are now what's called a willful infringer, and that would entitle them to 3 times the damages under copyright law. And so you don't want to be found to be a willful infringer. And one thing just about fair use, because I know a lot of documentary producers deal with issues of fair use. It's important to note and to be aware that fair use is not a license. It is a defense to copyright infringement, and it's a theory, and it really is very tricky. It's not an absolute thing. It requires a balancing of legal factors to determine whether, how you're using it, looking at the nature of your work, the nature of the work that you're taking the material from, how much of it you're taking, how substantive it is, the effect your use is going to have on the marketability of the other work that you're using from, and so it's a balancing of those factors, and there's no guarantee that it'll always come out your way. So you definitely want to get a legal opinion on your fair use, and also keep in mind at the same time that a legal opinion is still just an opinion, and it's still not a guarantee that the defense will be upheld. So you always want to be very careful in, quote, some people like to fair use everything, and not every use is going to be a fair use. So you want to be mindful of getting all of your ducks in a row when you're doing production work.
Yeah, because a lot of people want to do documentaries or even, film something based on somebody. So it's very important that knowing all these details, because then people will know now what to do to be able to not cover too much themselves, but at least know what is out there.
Yeah, and in talking to you, I just want to be clear. I don't want people to think that I'm giving legal advice here. This is not to provide people with legal advice. If you have legal issues, you need to consult a lawyer. But just to give an idea to people of kind of when there might be a red flag and what kind of issues you should be aware of, and when you should go and consult a lawyer, because there are a lot of variables and a lot of circumstances that make the difference, and really only talking to a lawyer about your issue will be the way to resolve it.
When we talk about agreement contracts on set, let's say, the actors, the crew, or the permit, it's just so many contracts on so many, every department is different, because, sometimes there is union, there is non-union. So, but it's a basics, and sometimes when you're like a young filmmaker, producer, you're like, oh, I don't want to bother them, or I don't, like, even myself, I felt sometimes that I didn't have to. But in terms of distribution, it's very important that you actually do that while you're on set, because you never know what's going to happen.
Well, yeah,
with
absolutely.
The people.
I mean, and again, that's the chain of title, because, missing a critical element can really inhibit your ability to distribute the project, to sell the project. And it's not uncommon. Producers often feel hesitant to present people with, paperwork, contracts, and they feel a little funny about it. And I always tell them, you have to tell the person it's not just for the production of the protection of the producer, but it's also for the protection of the other person, in terms of them being able to document their creative contribution, to be able to document their entitlement to whatever compensation that they might get, and also their entitlement to credit if that's part of the deal. So it's one of those things where, you just kind of have to do it. And ideally, you will have a lawyer who will provide you with a set of very short form agreements that are pretty straightforward and easy to manage, that will not be overly intimidating, where the person getting it goes, oh my God, I really, this is overwhelming. It's, 20-page document for like a day of work or something like that. So you want to have a good set of short, easy to read production agreements, and you do want to use them, because, as you say, anything could happen to someone who's made a creative contribution and they disappear, and suddenly you've got a big chunk or a portion of your work that's not cleared, and you're not sure how to clear it, and there's really not much you can do about it. And so particularly, you want to clear all the music, you want to clear everything. And when in doubt, ask your lawyer.
Yes. And you pass the stage of production, but then you go to post-production, you go to hire somebody that will compose the music, somebody that's going to write the songs, editors. There is so much. What the filmmaker, producer will need to know when they are doing those steps?
Well, music can be particularly tricky because you're not dealing with just one, not dealing just with, the artist. You've got the musicians, you've got the performers, you've got, if they're going to be on camera, you've got the composer, you've got the publisher. There can be a lot of different moving parts in terms of where you have to get permission, and it's usually not from one person. Sometimes, like, if you've got a performer or an artist who's going to be performing on camera, you want to be very aware and careful as to whether or not they are actually signed to a record company, because in that case, even if you get the artist's consent, it's not a consent that they actually have the right to give, because the record company has the exclusive right to all of their performances on camera, and so you may be getting permission from the wrong person. So you have to make sure you are getting your releases and your agreements with the right parties. Whether, if they've got a publishing agreement, do they control their own publishing? So you have to make sure with music that you are really on top of it.
Yeah, and sometimes I think it's not about to get scared. It's just about to say, hey, maybe we could do a meeting with your record label, and maybe they even like the film or the TV show. And sometimes it's better to be informed and do the right thing, and then you don't regret it later on, because everything costs money at the end of the day.
Yeah, I mean, and it's what you really want when you've got an artist who's got a record deal is you really want the artist's cooperation in helping you and approaching the record company, and you want the artist to really get the record company on board, because the record company probably is, they're not that crazy about you approaching them, but they want to make their artists happy. And so if the artist is going to the record label saying, hey, I really want to do this project, can you give me can you sign off on me doing this project? That's really kind of the best way to approach the record companies on that one.
Okay, so let's say now that all this process are done, and now we're gonna go on distribution. What is the process or the right process to do the distribution deals, or to look at those contracts and agreements?
Well, you want to think about where it is your market is. I mean, are you looking to distribute a film? Is it television? Or is it a direct-to-digital type of property? So it really kind of depends on the nature of your project, the route you want to go. And when you are approached by a distributor, you want to think about whether they're the right avenue for your property. Does it really get your property the audience that you're looking for?
Yeah.
And what are the distributor's capabilities in terms of providing marketing support? What is their primary distribution media? Do they really have the ability to distribute in all the media that they're asking you for rights in? So you want to make sure that you are limiting their rights, the rights that you're granting, to the media that they can actually cover, as well as the geographical limitations. If they are just a U.S. distributor, you want to make sure that you are reserving rights for international distribution so that you can make another deal. And so you want to kind of look at who the distributor is, what their capabilities are, and what kind of rights you want to reserve in terms of other things you may want to do. Like if you want to reserve things like, if you think there's an opportunity for this to become a live stage performance, or if you're thinking that you've got a book in mind that you've been thinking about the whole time as well, and it lends itself to a book, you might want to reserve those publishing rights. So you want to be mindful of future iterations and things that you can do with your property that the first distributor that you come to may not be able to fully monetize or exploit for you.
Yeah, because let's say that there is just that distributor that will do theaters or like only online platforms.
Yeah.
But maybe you have another one that want to do theaters.
Yeah.
So those are the things that, you know, people should be looking at it.
And the lawyer, you know, who handles distribution deals will know to look at that and also be thinking about, you know, all of the different places and ways that this can be monetized. And I always like to encourage producers to think very long term and think very broadly about the potential uses of their property. You know, if you are producing something that can be segmented, you want to be thinking about the potential uses of those segments in social media as promotional tools, or how it might be licensed out to companies looking for short form type of content. There are so many places now that you find content in so many different ways that your property could show up after its first life, so to speak, you know, in terms of down the road, you know, secondary media licensing and uses. So think very long term and think broadly of who else might want to use your content.
Where are the areas that you think people can actually have their content out there?
Well, there anywhere. I mean, you look now, anywhere you see content, and in taxis you see content, in grocery stores, in elevators. There are, and I've done a license for content for what used to be GPS devices. So there are a myriad of places where you can have your content distributed. And now with digital platforms, there are certainly lots of things, lots of places to distribute it. So you want to think about where else, and you want to think about the advertising, potential advertisers and advertising tie-ins that you might be able to make in terms of how you're monetizing your property, whether it's looking at advertisers from sponsorship, whether you're looking for integrated advertising, product placement within your property. Look at the advertisers that your property might lend itself to, as far as, you know, if it's online, you know, front end and back end advertising. You know, you want to really be thinking about the potential monetization.
The advertising could be, for example, like a sponsor of, let's say, one of the artists are drinking something, or even using a website.
Yeah.
Things like that, right?
Things like that. I mean, if there are places in the show, if it's a project that uses a lot of automobiles, you see this a lot of times, where you'll be looking at a show and you'll say, well, gee, I wonder why are all of the cars in here from one brand? And it's usually not by accident. If it's a property that shows the cars in a good light and something that resonates with the brand's sensibility in terms of how they view the brand, and resonates with the audience that your project speaks to, then, you know, that's a great opportunity to look at, you know, where are there natural synergies for a product manufacturer to have an integration or a whole sponsorship of my property. And this is particularly true with respect to television, because any television distributor is always looking at a project and thinking in the back of their mind of, you know, who are the advertisers? You know, what are the advertising opportunities? Is this something I can sell advertising against pretty easily? And so you want to always be mindful of that. Yeah.
Nice. And what are the difference between a film and a TV show? Like, what will be the legal aspect that, you know, there is some people that want to, you know, work more towards feature films or shorts. There is more people that want to do TV. So what will be the response for those filmmakers, producers?
Well, particularly, you know, again, the biggest one is looking at advertisers. I mean, television, you know, unless it's pay cable, the television distributors always have to be mindful of advertisers. So you want to be thinking about how your project pitches to advertisers. Is it a project that's going to put certain advertisers off or invite certain advertisers? You want to be able to kind of add that to the value when you're looking to the distributor in terms of saying, you know, this is a project that these types of advertisers should really want to latch on to. The other thing is if you are, in particular, when you're talking about producing a television series, you want to, I mean, it's always important to look at the title that you've chosen for your project. For a film, because it's a one-off, you can't trademark it, but a title of a series, you have to think about the potential where you can register and get trademark rights. And in either case, you always want to Google your title, because you don't want, as I've seen happen, you don't want to pick a title that you haven't Googled, that then when you do Google it, I'll give you an example, you Google it and you find out that it really brings up a porn distributor or something else that is really not what you want to associate your project with. So you want to make sure that the title is something that's not already out there being used in a bad light. And if it's a series, you want to make sure that it's short. You don't want a very, very long title because it's not very useful from a trademark perspective. And you want to avoid, if you can, putting the name of your talent in the name of the series, because it just makes it more complicated in terms of the ability to sell the series as a format to other geographical areas, to other countries, because the talent will be replaced and now you've devalued because you can't also sell the name of the series with the format. So you want to be thinking of the title of a series in terms of the merchandisability, whether you got a title that can be used on merchandise, that it's available, someone else has not already registered it. So you want to think, again, very broadly, very long term, of how far can this project go, not just the first iteration.
My question now is, would you like to give any other recommendation?
Just think of all the possibilities when you are producing. Think long term. Clear your rights for long term, as if this will be, be greater than what you're expecting, so that you don't reach a point of like catastrophic success where you've now got the ability or the opportunity to do more with your project than, let's say, you've cleared it for, to do more than you're really prepared for. You want to think about the secondary uses that might be available, and really think broadly, because these days with content, there are a lot of places you can put it and a lot of things you can do with it, and you want to be ready for all of them. And you want to make sure that you've got all your legal ducks in a row and that you're prepared for everything that might come.
Nice. How can actually people know more about you, or do you have a website? Or?
I do. If people want to reach me or read about me, I am at cheyblakelelaw.com, and it's CHEY Blake, BLAKE, law.com, and they can reach me there. There's a phone number and an email, and I'm happy to speak to anyone and see how I can help.
Thank you so much for your time.
You are welcome.
We
My
appreciate
pleasure.
it.
Yeah.
And I know the audience of LFM TV also is going to appreciate it.
My pleasure. Anytime.